And we're underway. So today, in fact, on Monday, we have the third plenary of the 20th session of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. And that seems to be causing some conflicting stories, different schools of thought. I mean, looking at Western think tanks, such as the Asia Society, the Atlantic Council, they seem to think that this entire session, like all other sessions that China holds, are a waste of time, a quote, rubber stamp exercise, and they're purely to allow the party to consolidate its hold over the people. That's something we've been hearing for the last 70 years or so. So no doubt their party has now consolidated its hold. Chinese commentary suggests it's much more important, and it's a time for monetary reform, debt restructuring, stimulus to boost the economy. So joining me today is the very, very well-known Einar Tangen, and his credentials are just too long to list. But currently, if I've got this right, Einar, you're a senior fellow of the Taihe Institute, correct? And
Correct.
you are obviously a very well-respected commentator on Chinese matters. So anybody who follows anything to do with China will know you from your frequent CGTN and other media appearances. And I have a feeling that's the first time we ever interacted. It was on Liu Xin's The Point, the first time I ever interacted with you. So thank you for joining me, and welcome to my small, but thanks to the kindness of such great guests as yourself, growing audience. So this is an important event for us. It's 205 elected members of the Standing Committee with 171 alternates. So it's almost 400 people discussing the future of China. It's called the Third Plenum for a simple reason. In each sitting of the Central Committee's 5-year terms, they have at least 2, and sometimes they have 4, and this is the third. So my first question, Einar, is this a rubber stamp event?
Well, no. I mean, if you want to call it that, then your curiosity ends at that point. So,
True.
I mean, obviously, I don't have to say that there is a divide, ideological and economic, between the West, established colonial powers, and the rising. It's not just China. It's also the BRICS and SCO and many other groupings, the RCEP, the economic side, the Belt and Road Initiative. These are being looked at as challenges as opposed to opportunities. So, when you think about China, you have to, especially from outside China, you have to think beyond the processes we know in the US. An incredible amount of information was gathered and analyzed as part of the recommendations made to the top bodies. Think, if you're in America, the Congressional Research Department on steroids. Instead of just coming up with excuses for legislation, they actually examine it and the long-term implications and, how that would all work. So a lot of it depends on your viewpoints. And the emphasis is different in terms of the opinions. If you're in the Commerce Department, perhaps you have a slightly different view than if you're in statistics or in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Agriculture, etc. So, what you should be looking for in these plenums, these meetings, is, how is China's leadership thinking not only about the solution today, but the solutions and the problems they will create tomorrow, and how those solutions can be done. It's kind of like chess. If you can think a little beyond the moment, you can probably be much more prepared. So as if you can think 5 moves ahead, you're always going to beat somebody who's only 4 moves ahead. So that's how it is. I mean, it's hard to say it's not a rubber stamp, because people who believe that will not be moved. The question is, do you have, your own ability to examine what is being said and what is being proposed? It's the long-term thinking that has kept China ahead over these years. I mean, to give you an example, in 2013, Xi Jinping had a third plenum. And that was just after he came in 2012. There were 60 points which defined the direction of China. There were a lot of internal discussions then, as today. There's always this tension within China about, you have a socialist priorities, taking care of the people, all right, having a balanced economy, having something that's sustainable. And then you have, private sector concerns. People say, well, what about my life today? And, what are the opportunities? And what part does, the markets play in this? And generally ends up being a pragmatic mix of those two things. It's not a on and off switch, and right now, China is looking at a lot of internal as well as external pressures. As they say, you can't choose the times you live in, just how you live in them. So there's a kind of contradiction in a lot of what the West reports about China is doing. That's nothing new, but this relates to the amount of economic growth coming from the private sector.
So you and I both live in China. Extended periods in China. I'm not sure how long you've been here. I think it's probably longer than me. I'm 20 years now.
No, we're about the same.
About the same, right. Do you feel the Atlantic Council reports, and pretty much every document I've ever read that comes out of an American think tank or Washington-based organization, they say this whole thing is about consolidating Xi Jinping's power. What do we say about that? How do we overcome that?
Well, Jerry, it's very ironic because everything we do in the U.S. is about consolidating our power. We have a tendency to accuse others of doing exactly what we're doing. So I think you have to take that with a huge grain of salt, maybe a couple of tons. But a lot of this is the lack of understanding based on ideological and competitive assumptions about China. There's always in the background this fear that China will do what, has been done to it and other colonial possessions over these last 350, 400 years.
Yeah.
It's not just what has happened, it's what's continuing to happen. You look at Gaza, you look at, the incredible, callousness of convincing Filipino people they shouldn't take Chinese vaccines. And the Pentagon says, well, yeah, so what? People died, but this was a great opportunity to attack China. That, in a nutshell, kind of, encompasses, the thinking about China, especially within the Beltway. I mean,
I wrote an article. It was one of the very first articles I ever wrote, which said that the biggest fear that America has, seems to me anyway, to be that China will be like them. And I think that's probably what you're saying there. Do you think?
Oh, exactly.
China would be like them, knowing what you know now?
No, China isn't. I mean, you have to think of it slightly differently. In America, we are an empire. We, said, oh, South America's ours. We cheated the Native Americans despite signing 400 treaties. We broke them all. We took their land. And we have the sense that we're entitled to take things. That's an empire. This is like Genghis Khan. He didn't, consider the welfare of the people he was about to slaughter. He just went in and did that. And, China is a civilization. What's the difference? Empires look outwards to solve their problems. If I just take more land and more resources, everything will be okay. Civilizations tend to know where their boundaries are, or at least they think they know, and there might be disputes. But end of the day, they're concerned about how to manage what they have, not acquire more. They generally are focused, like China is, on how you manage 1.4 billion people over a huge swath of land that have very different cultures and attitudes and things like that, although they are, quote, one people. So, I think China often expects the U.S. to transition from an empire to a civilization. But that hasn't happened yet. Hopefully it will, because then many things are possible. But until that time, there's always going to be some, differences there. They just a lack of understanding. I've talked to so many Chinese officials, and they're quite earnest, and they say, well, what? This doesn't make any sense what the U.S. is doing. This is endangering the world. I mean, how does Ukraine, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza, Sudan, Somalia, Lebanon, how does this make any sense at all? Don't they want to come to some sort of reasonable way in which we can occupy this world together? And I have to say, he says that's not the way it works in the United States. Politics is completely different. It's not something that involves all of society. It involves mostly special interests, people who have the money and power to push their agendas and ideas. And so, when you look at the U.S., you have to understand it is what it is. It's not what you want it to be. And in the U.S., they have to understand that China is what it is, and not some sort of faded copy of what America wants it to be, which seems to be like the rest of the world. They want it in a slight bit of chaos, so it's easier to control.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the third session, or the third plenary session. There seems to be a contradiction in what the West is reporting and what China is doing, which there's nothing new there. I mean, that's just a normal state of events, I think. I'm seeing that the amount of economic growth in China coming from the private sector is increasing. And I remember Xi Jinping at the last CPPCC meeting saying, when he was rounding off and everything, he said he wanted to increase that. He was happy it had gone over 50% and he wanted to continue that. But the West are now saying, no, he wants to bring that back. He wants to rein it in. So we've got Chinese think tanks and Xi Jinping's voice Western think tanks and Xi Jinping's voice disagreeing with each other there. What do you think is really happening? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, our think tanks are generally funded by the government or by organizations which are, they believe in American exceptionalism. They really believe that, you have to make a good omelet, you have to break a few eggs, that what America does is in the greater interest of humanity, even if it kills a lot of people. I was listening to horrible statistics about, wars, in the Middle East, which have, killed 4.5 million people, displaced over 40 million people, and causing havoc around the area. So, when you talk about, how they view this, you have to kind of look at the assumptions that are being made. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. The U.S. assumes that any other country that comes to power and is at the, quote, top, and that's the idea that, in America, we believe it's king of the hill. China doesn't. They really don't want to be king of the hill. They saw what happened to Washington after the fall of the wall, how the world's problems became all of a sudden the U.S. problems. But instead of kind of taking that burden, we shifted to, going after Afghanistan and destroying all the soft power that we had built up. So, Washington think tanks have their own view on things. It's all based on assumptions. I tell you, if you allow me to set the assumptions, I guarantee you I can influence what the answer is going to be. So within China, it's, things are not black and white. They see things as a puzzle. How do you balance these socialist ideas with the efficiencies created by capitalism, by the market, things like that? And they're constantly tinkering with it. Right now, it's ironic that these think tanks are talking about, what China's doing. It's all this and that. But they don't discuss the pressures that the U.S. is putting on China. That is, in essence, driving China to make decisions which are going to have long-lasting effects. Every time, the U.S. government says, well, we don't want any new tech going to China. Well, China's half of all the chips they use. They use half of all the chips in the world that are manufactured in the world by saying, oh, we're not going to sell to them. It's not that China's going to stop making stuff. They're just going to figure out ways of making stuff without U.S. chips. which means in the future, U.S. chip making companies are going to be foreclosed out of the largest market in the world, one that continues to grow and one that has the largest consumer market, which continues to have increased disposable income. So, if you have less revenues, it's less profits, less money into research and development, and this is a downward spiral. So, there's a complete lack of reflection within the Beltway. And I don't care if you're talking to congressmen and senators or the president or any of these think tanks. I shouldn't say any. There are quite a few very reasonable people out there, but their voices are now being suppressed. We're going through this period of McCarthyism where you're either with the program or against it. As Blinken said, you're either at the table or you're on the menu.
Yeah,
I thought that was
on the menu
statement. He hasn't retracted it either, and he's used it again.
Yeah, well, he's not likely to either. So, somebody asked the question there: what's happening with Chinese chips? I mean, do you know the answer? That's a fairly technical answer to this question.
I do quite a bit in this area. Okay, so what's happening is China is trying very hard to develop the high-end chips. They've had some success, but not the efficiencies that they would need. But on the other hand, it's cheaper to produce in China. So eventually they are going to figure it out. I mean, you look at the number of engineers in China versus the United States, and you quickly understand that this is a human resource problem. You need brain power to overcome, to create new things. And China has what it needs to do that. And they're already showing that. 5G was not a mistake. China is forging ahead into 6G, creating more efficient solar cells, better wind farm equipment, EVs, batteries, all these things. These show very clearly that China is capable. But on the low end market, and you have to understand that your vacuum cleaner and your car and things like that don't use these 2 nanometer chips. Those are really reserved for your cell phone and maybe missiles in certain applications. Although even missiles, I talk to military people and say, well, we don't like to use those small chips because they can be interfered with. And also, rockets are rumbling around and they're going through the air and there's a lot of vibration and things like this. We generally go with larger chips because the amount of space in the missile is not constrained. We're not concerned about energy consumption, and we're most concerned about shielding and the durability of them being able to do what they do. So the majority of chips used in the world are low tech. They're 48 nanometer, 24 nanometer. They don't need a lot of horsepower in order to do what they need to do. So China has now, and you've seen reports in the press where there's concerns now that China is dominating the legacy chip area. And legacy literally means anything that isn't part of the cutting edge side. And now there's concerns. Well, how can that happen? Well, gee whiz. Of course it's going to happen. They have all the chip making equipment to do that. Now Washington is trying to figure out how they can step on that, figure out a way to quash it.
And how they can bring Holland and Taiwan and everybody else in to help them out with that. So Chinese pundits suggest that there's going to be a lot of debt reform, maybe local debt restructured into national debt as part of this, coming out of this, and relaxations on hukou restrictions. Now, the Western pundits had a very different interpretation on that. If the Chinese government relaxes the hukou restrictions, it's going to cause a swarm of people coming into the cities for no reason, because there's no jobs, there's no houses. But by the way, we have like 40 million empty houses or something like that. So, there's all kinds of contradictions going on. Do you have any predictions on what's going to happen at this meeting?
Yes. First off, there is going to be a concerted attempt to address debt issues, and it's not all going to be financial wizardry. They're also looking at sources of income and things like that.
Yep.
Local government entities are mostly funded, over 50% funded by land leases and sales.
Yep.
Because those are high, that drives the cost of housing up. All right. There's so much of the money which is going to the local authority, and they have every incentive to try to sell because they need the money. That needs to be changed. If you can get governments on a sound footing with some sort of taxes, it can be value added. They are definitely looking at property tax. But the question is how you phase that in, at what levels, and things like that. In the U.S., we always say the switch is either on or off. You either have no controls over hookah, or it's an authoritarian state. Now, these are the same groups that have been complaining for years that China has these hookahs to begin with. Now they say if you stop them, disaster will happen. So it's hard to take them with too much seriousness. In terms of that issue, how to solve it, as I said, it's going to be a practical balancing act. You don't want people showing up in cities without jobs. There's extra housing around, but a lot of that housing is far from the center of town. It's not near areas where there are businesses that can absorb them. So there has to be very, very careful consideration. So it'll probably change the emphasis to allowing people to come into cities as opposed to just saying, everyone just go wherever you want and do whatever you want. That does affect the infrastructure. I remember I wrote a book on, there's a district called Fengtai. Most people know Haidian and Chaoyang, but Fengtai is down in the south. And we were discussing these issues, and I was talking to planning people for the city of Beijing, and I said, well, you seem to have a lot of congestion. Didn't you plan for this? And he said, yes. But we were planning for a city of 15 million, and we have 22 million. So our success, the success of bringing people in exceeded our expectations in terms of serving them. Now, China is a place where they do very much care about the physical surroundings. I mean, when I first came to China, it was tough. I mean, everything was gray. There was a lot of smog. People use these, you'll remember, they use these charcoal briquettes to cook their meals. Yep. So in the morning and noon and night, there was a kind of black brown haze covering things. The bus fumes were unbelievable. The gas was not refined highly enough, so you really got a lot of pollution. Now, you walk around in Beijing or many other cities throughout China, and it's blue skies, clean air, clean streets, safe streets. There's a lot of attention being paid to the environment. There's a place called the Liangmahe River Walk, which extends through the center of Beijing, and it's just beautiful. And what the Chinese government is doing is paying a lot of attention to making sure that if you're living in a city, it's not about accepting squalor and crime and things like that people expect in areas like the U.S. and some parts of Europe. They want it to be a fulfilling experience, something that allows you to have a complete life. So these are all considerations when you start looking at hukou reform and how to do it. Also, the other side of hukou reform that people never talk about is that a lot of these small villages and smaller towns, they depend on the hukou payments that they get from the government, even though the people aren't there. These are not, wealthy places. They're barely getting by. They have problems, funding their schools and things like this. So you also have to think about those areas. How do you address their concerns? You can't just start taking the money away or just throwing it wherever somebody happens to land. There's a lot of logistical issues and things like that. So, you can always take a complex situation and make it into a simple yes or no, or you can do the work, the research, start looking at the scenarios and decide what is necessary to make this work.
Hello,
Jerry, can you hear me?
Yeah, it just went very quiet there for a moment. Sorry.
Oh, I ended. I can only gas on for so long.
No, it's okay. Just what just suddenly happened? Um, I was looking at a comment there because you were talking about something, and I was thinking ahead of myself there to the next question, which was about the displacement. And I was going to ask you to talk about some of the challenges that China has. The displacement of Didi or taxi driver. We've already lost, where I live anyway, there's almost no taxis. I mean, there are a few, but very few. They sit around the train station. Didi drivers, as we move into the autonomous driving, which is already happening. I think there are 10,000 in Wuhan now, and that's an experimental. It's the future. So we may be only 5 to 10 years away from having basically no more taxi drivers, no Didi drivers. Everybody's going to be getting into autonomous cars. What's going to happen to these people? And is China ignoring this potential problem?
No, I don't think so. I mean, at the Taihe Institute, we're constantly having programs and discussions about what is necessary to train people to get them so that they do have a place in this new emerging digital economy. And it comes down to training, simply that. There is always displacement. I mean, you go back to the Industrial Revolution, the agricultural people came into town and they were things. And then, you saw automation coming in, and now it's only increasing. So the amount of labor, repetitive labor that is needed is going down. So the question is, what do you do about this, people? Well, on one hand, you hear from the West, oh, China has a demographic problem. They don't have enough people to man all of their economy, and there'll be no consumption and all this type of stuff. Ironic, coming from a country that has 4.5% of the world's population, but consumes about 20% of its GDP output. Yeah. So this idea that you have to have people in order to drive growth is, I think, pretty much nonsense. The question is, how do you take care of people? And this is what the Chinese government is constantly trying to figure out. And it is a balancing act. It's not a thing, well, I'll just give them money and everything will be fine. No, you have the training has to be there. And the question is how. I mean, I can give you an example. My grandmother was instrumental in creating the clothes dryer industry. And she was attacked by the Clothespin Association, who said, do you realize that you will be putting hundreds of thousands of washerwomen, women who are the mainstay of their family's income? Because back then, you had to hang your washing out on Mondays. Otherwise, people would look at you and say, they're not too clean. So it was a status thing. So, these armies of washerwomen were there. Was that a fun job, washing other people's sheets and clothes and then going home and doing your own? I don't think so. And what happened was, yes, the washerwomen went away, but they found other jobs that were higher paying in factories and doing other things that were necessary. And as a result, their lives got better, not worse, because of change. And this is one of the issues. You can look at change as bad, or you can look at change as good. The fact is, it's a little bit of both, but with a little bit of planning and thoughtfulness about those around you, instead of just selfishly thinking about yourself, you can actually find opportunities and make matches that make sense.
Yeah, there's a school of thought that China is going to have, and even my wife was talking about it this morning. There's a whole heap of graduates unemployed. Yeah, but it's July. Of course there are. They've just left college. Most of them are on a holiday. I'm not going to get a job just yet. But this happens every year. It spikes. And I remember last year it was a huge event in Western media. Do you think that this is an ongoing problem? Because you've got some inside information on this through your time in Taihe, where you would probably understand a lot more of this than the reader of a Western media might understand.
Well, if you're relying on the Western media to understand China, you'll never
Never
understand
understanding.
it. So
Yeah.
I think it's better to get voices from all over the place. Look at other places and see how they view China. I mean, it's not, the switch isn't on or off. You either accept what China says or the US says. Take a look at the Belt and Road countries. You had 152 of them show up for the 10-year anniversary. All right. And in Beijing of the Belt and Road Initiative, that's 3/4 of the world's population. They didn't show up here because they had nothing to do. They showed up because they have tremendous interest in this program because it's providing the necessary infrastructure that they need in order to develop their economies. So when you start looking at what's happened with these new graduates, it is an issue. I mean, China has problems. The question is, are they trying to solve them? In the US, we have a debt problem. Is anyone trying to solve it? I haven't seen
Apparently
anything.
not.
Yeah, just kick it down the road and maybe it'll go away or something like this. Or maybe it's unlimited. Maybe we can spend forever and people still buy these bonds. In China, especially during COVID, after 2019, through that period, the number of jobs dried up, literally because you couldn't go to work, so you couldn't be hired. And also, their economic activity went down, except in specific areas like delivery, online buying, and things like this. So there has been a problem there. So what has happened to these people? I've been very interested in this, and most of them, if they haven't been able to get jobs, have in fact gone home. And and what I mean by home is they've gone back to their parents' house, their only children. Of course, they're going to be accepted back, and they live with their grandparents and their parents, and they become part of the household. But the key is, how do you get these back into productive use? And this is something that the Chinese government is constantly looking at. I've seen a number of symposiums where they say how to get this done. How can we work these people back in? But there's another side to this that people don't think about. China was created out of hardship. I mean, the revolution, the birth of new China wasn't because the old China was working well. And there were lots of issues in between when, you had revolutionaries trying to run a government. It's two different things. But through this opening up and reform period, China's had breakneck success, double-digit growth, all this type of stuff. And there's this expectation among people that, it's just going to get better and better. My life is going to be wonderful. But that's not reality. The reality is that things go up, they go down. The question is, how do you get them to go back up again? How do you plan? How do you take care of these issues? And in China, they have done a very, very good job. It's not that they haven't made mistakes. They have. But they continue to try to address the problems. You can see that quite plainly in how they eradicated poverty, extreme poverty. And it's not just a one-off victory. I did it for 6 months. Now let's pretend it didn't happen. That nothing else needs to happen.
Yeah.
Instead of walking away and just saying, "Oh, we did it at one time," they say, "We did it, and we're going to make sure it continues." The same kind of thinking goes into helping these younger people. The exact solution has been done. There are different ideas about how to work these people back into the environment. But there's another aspect to this. When I said that China has evolved based on hardship, this is really the first generation since the opening up where you've had a whole generation experiencing something very catastrophic. And in the past, that has taught lessons that you can't learn in school. So I'll be very interested to see how, when these people start returning to the workforce, how they view life, how they see it, what lessons they have learned. Now they have an understanding that not everything is rosy, that you do have to work hard and plan and prepare if you want a better future.
Yeah, it seems that they are planning and preparing. Have you heard, I keep hearing rumors. I've never met a person that this has happened to, but I keep hearing rumors that reduction of income is happening all across China and people are going to work and not getting paid for months. And I just keep hearing these stories in social media, Western social media. Have you heard of that or come across that as a phenomenon at all? It's certainly not happening. It doesn't appear to be happening in Zhongshan.
Yeah, sure. I heard about it 15, 20 years ago when
Okay.
a
Happening then
lot of
too.
Hong Kong companies left their factory workers high and dry. I mean, it's been going on forever, and it goes on in the US too, where companies just pull up and walk away, close the factory gates, and just say you're on your own.
Yeah.
Does it happen? Yes. Are there economic downturns right now? Are there brutal competition for markets? Are Chinese companies looking outside of China? Yes. All of that is true, but this idea that it's happening on a wide scale is nonsense. And the statistic I would give you is that disposable income in China last year went up by over 6%. Well, you can't have less money and have more disposable income. So overall,
Right.
the situation is good. What's lacking here is confidence. And what you see is a lot of pundits in the West, they seize on anecdotal stories and then they say, this proves it. China's about to fail. I mean,
Yeah.
The Economist magazine, which I a tremendous number of wonderful writers and articles and things like that. But over the last 25 years, they always say the same thing. This is the year. This is the year China collapses.
Yeah. 1990 was the first one, I think.
Yes, and it's a view based on your assumption that that all countries have to adhere to one homogeneous idea of liberal democratic capitalism, despite the fact that liberal democratic capitalism is practiced in Britain, the United States, most of Europe, and things like that, isn't doing particularly well. I always say it's not the system, it's the people. You can have a bad system. If you have good people, it works pretty well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need a perfect system of bad people. It won't work. And so right now, it's not the ideologies that are failing people. It is the people who are supposed to be helping them. And the question is, would you rather live in a place where the government's trying to do something, or in a place where the government is about just being reelected?
Yeah, well, that's also true. What do you think will happen with house prices? This seems to be the biggest story in the West. China's collapsing because house prices have collapsed. What do you think will happen there?
Oh, of course, we should all move out today. I mean, housing prices are high. The government is in a position where it doesn't want house prices to collapse. All right, why? Because people have mortgages. They're considering the hardworking people who went out and bought, homes for themselves.
Yeah.
Some of whom are still waiting while these big corporate behemoths who overextended themselves are going through bankruptcy. But on the other hand, they don't want the prices to continue to skyrocket. Why? Because median income and median house price are so far apart. It means that young people have no hope, barring their parents and grandparents helping them, of actually owning a home. And owning a home is very, very important in China. I mean, it used to be that if a young man didn't have a house, his ability to get married would be severely impaired. And it certainly would not be with somebody of his own class. He'd have to marry down or something like this. So this is something where the government is trying to pay attention to what people need, and at the same time, what the economy needs. It's not on or off. There's always competing interests, and it's how you balance them.
I saw a report that said every 1 RMB that the government puts into the economy will generate 4 RMB in domestic spending. So I'm talking about in stimulus here. So if the government puts 1 trillion RMB, or it's about 150 billion US dollars into the economy in terms of travel vouchers, meal vouchers, accommodation, that kind of thing, then people will spend a lot more money. Do you think that's going to come out of this session?
I doubt it. This is what we call helicopter money. And if it had worked, the United States would be doing just fine right now, because we just threw money at people during the pandemic. Instead, we created more debts and a hangover that resulted in quite a bit of inflation. So, this idea that you just simply throw money at it doesn't work. China knows that. They've been fiscally and monetarily very conservative in their approach because they've seen what's happened elsewhere. They actually learn. What a strange idea.
Yeah.
They're going to do targeted stimulus. They're still very interested in improving rural communities, making them more livable. There's a tremendous amount of work to do, not so much in infrastructure in terms of roads and rail and things like that, but in making cities more livable and more desirable. So they're taking an all of country approach and not saying, okay, we'll sacrifice this to help that. That was decisions like that were made early on, very clearly. I mean, the eastern part of China developed, and the western and other parts, kind of had to wait. But it was necessary because they needed to start building the wealth and products and economic activity that was necessary to carry through. But since that time, what you've seen is, every single one of these cities in the east has to adopt a city in the west or the south, north, trying to help them and bring them up.
I'm going out to Guizhou in a month, 4th to the 7th. I'm off to Guizhou to go to a city that we are linked with and have helped. So a lot of Guizhou people are coming to Zhongshan through this, I think you call it a pairing system. A richer city on the East Coast helps a poorer city inland. And I've known about this for quite a long time, but just a few days ago, I got an invitation from my local newspaper, Zhongshan Ribao, or Ribao, and they're saying, would you like to come and have a look at this and view this? This is a media trip, so I'm getting taken out there by the media, so it'll be a little stage managed. But I'm actually quite excited about that because I'm a big fan of poverty alleviation. I've been to a lot of places where you can see this in action, and I think this is the first time I will have been to a place where because my wife and I raise funds, and our fundraising has actually, some of it has gone out to there. So that's going to be quite an exciting time for us to actually see what we've done and what we've achieved. So that'd be interesting.
Yeah, but you look at that and you don't have any parallels like that in Europe or America. I mean, yes, they have sister city relations with places outside the country where they're simply trying to promote economic activity. But there's no sense of really caring about the people you're dealing with. You're just trying to make a buck. Yeah. In the Chinese system, this is about caring, about showing responsibility. All right, you're rich, you need to help the poor, and that is your responsibility. Not everybody does it, but it is something that this kind of value-based system that the Chinese government is always trying to promote, whether it's through Confucianism or through the texts at school and things like that, that there is, in fact, not just rights, but responsibilities, and that they have to be balanced. You can't have one without the other. So it's a different kind of system. I wish people were a little bit more open. It's not saying that you should adopt these. Every culture, every country has its own rubric of how it wants to do things. I'm just saying that perhaps it is time we learn that values are really important, not being smart and cheating on your taxes and sleeping with porn stars and cheating at golf and things like this. That really isn't the kind of person you want running your country. And it shows a complete lack of values on there. And I'm not trying to be puritanical about this. I'm just saying that, somebody who obviously flaunts the law isn't going to obey it suddenly because you put them in office and given them the power to literally disobey it.
Well, China has a name for this. It's called the third distribution. And it's something that I only recently learned about. I knew it existed, but I didn't know it had a title, third distribution. And some people, again, Westerners mostly, are saying that this is a case of the best thing you can do is to tax the rich. And what China says, no, it's not a good idea to overtax the rich. The richer you are, the better it is for the country, as long as you have a knowledge or an acknowledgement of this third distribution system. So companies like Tencent, for example, Tencent donates billions and billions of dollars to charity, but it also does lots of work so that everything that it donates gets matched through its customer base. So people are putting money into Tencent. And this is third distribution. This is not a taxation system. They're not saying, well, Tencent's one of the richest companies in the country. Let's tax them to, like they did in Britain back in the 1960s and 70s. I think almost all the pop stars, rock stars, film stars all left the UK because tax was 97%. So if you earn 100,000, you only got 3,000 for your night's work. Now that 100,000 was a lot of money in the day. £3,000 could have bought you a small house, but it's not the point. You've spent 97% of it on tax. And so what China is saying is, we're not going to do this. We're not going to rob you to give your money to the poor, but we're going to have an expectation on you. And if you don't, then it's you in society that you have to answer for. I think it's kind of Buddhist in a way. That's my view of it anyway. It seems like whatever you get.
I completely agree with you. I was involved in politics in the U.S. I was, went to city and state positions, things like this. You cannot legislate good people or good acts. You can create laws that punish people, as a deterrent, but you can't legislate values. Values have to really come, by watching others, being inspired to do it, feeling that sense of responsibility. And, it's ironic that in the US, we complain bitterly about everybody not having a sense of values or our values. The fact is, we don't really seem to be exhibiting those values. The callousness of, telling Filipinos that they don't need they shouldn't take the Chinese vaccine because something bad will happen. Unprovoked wars, the list goes on and on. Just imagine, in America, if we just, obeyed 60% of what we tell other people to do. I mean, the perception in the global South and stands, or the rest of the world, whatever you want to call it, is that the U.S. just does whatever it wants, and it preaches, but it doesn't practice. And that is
that's really a perception, or is that a reality?
No, that is a reality. We don't. I mean, we break, if you ask me, what is the definition of a rogue country? I would say, well, it's a country that doesn't obey international laws or norms, that breaks treaties, that starts wars unprovoked, that engages in economic sanctions unilaterally in its own interests, and which disregards any interest except their own. Well, truthfully, that would be describing the United States. And this is something that we have to get away from. We have to start being, if we want people to admire us, we have to act in a way in which they would admire us.
Which is admirable.
That's the problem. China to a large extent does, but it's you have this constant noise coming out of the Western press saying, oh, no, it's a terrible place. Oh, be afraid, be very afraid. Well, I would really love all of America to come and stay in China for about 4 weeks and then go back to the US and experience what it's like in China to live completely free of fear that you're going to be mugged or killed, the victim of a drive-by shooting, that your things are going to be taken. There's this complete disconnect because people just don't know each other, which is why I do think this people-to-people diplomacy is very, very important. Question is, how do you do it effectively?
I went out a couple of days ago on my bike, and I was planning to go out again in the afternoon. So I just put my bike in the backyard. It's an open backyard, completely open. It's overlooked. There's no fence, there's no gate, there's no barriers. And I had my action camera, the DJI action camera, on the bike, on the handlebars. And I was going to leave it there just for a couple of hours because my wife said she wanted to go out in the afternoon. But the rain started and we didn't go out, and I completely forgot. Then we went out to dinner, and then I came home, and then we went to bed. And I got up in the morning to go on my bike ride, and oh my God, I've just left my bike out the back. it's completely open, not locked. And I walked out there, and sure enough, my bike is still there. My camera is still on the bike. Oh, and while we were out having dinner, someone delivered 12 cases of wine, which was sitting next to my bike.
Well,
And
wait a
they're left
second.
overnight.
Wait. We need to share.
I'll send you one. You leave me your address. Let's go back. I have one more question about our session before we get off onto a general discussion. Can China continue to attract foreign investment, or the US and EU seem to be working very hard to prevent it? Although one of the biggest sources of foreign investment in China is Germany and France as well. They're large sources of foreign investment. So can China continue to attract that?
Well, this is the way I always put it. There's such a thing as economic gravity, and the economic gravity is moving eastwards. Market, production, they create their own avenues. It's money is and investment is like water. It just flows to wherever it can make more money. So, and there are too many ways to circumvent the artificial economic boundaries that are being set up. So, it will continue to come to China. Why? It's not about values per se. What it is in America and or the rest of the world. I shouldn't generalize about America. The rest of the world is looking for places where it can earn a return. Right? If I invest $1, I'm going to have more in the future? Well, what are your choices today? Well, the U.S. At 2.5%, but politically things are a little dicey. You have Europe, which is basically in a recession, especially the developed countries. Ironically, the countries in the that were formerly in the Soviet Union are doing better than their counterparts, their developed counterparts. Who, you remember when it was G7, G8, and it was like, oh, we know better because we make money. Now you don't hear that so much. But anyways, what are the opportunities in Europe? They're very, very slim. And even if you're looking at plays in South America and Africa, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, a lot of the economic activity is centered around China. I mean, China has over 120 countries where it is the primary trade partner. You just can't get around that. So I'm not saying all roads lead to Beijing or to China, but most of the roads do. And economically, you can either be in China or outside of China, but it's still going to be about China, not the US and Europe. The US and Europe are rich. They still have a lot of money, but their economies aren't working well because the lifestyle is such that you get higher wages. Those higher wages make it more difficult to produce effectively, efficiently, and still be internationally competitive. So yes, China is going to continue to be a destination, and it has less to do with values than this idea of making money.
Okay, so the idea of this third plenary session is that it's not a rubber stamp. We have a lot of things going on in the background.
Well, let me expand on that, Jerry, just a little bit. All right. So I read about through 30 different articles by Chinese think tank people, academics, people in government. And it comes down to there are about 3 different ideas about it. And one is that the emphasis should be on, a socialist government-led initiative that brings in the small, medium-sized business entities, which are so important to China. Remember, 90% of new jobs, 80% of existing jobs are all supplied by the small, medium-sized business entities. And that's not only true in China, it's true through most of the world. The vast majority of employments and economic activity is in that area, except when you get to developing countries. And then you have the other side, which says, no, it should be more led by the small, medium-sized business entities in cooperation or supported by the state-owned enterprises and the government, e.g. a more market-based approach. And then the third approach is basically saying, look, it's not either or. Our emphasis is being more pragmatic. Let's plug the holes where we see the leaks, and then have some sort of overall strategy in terms of the direction of the boat. So those are the three. What is surprising, I think, to most people who don't know China is that there is such an active, debate that goes on prior to any kind of decision that's made. After the decision is made, right, you're expected to fall in line. If you start arguing against it because you didn't like losing your argument or something like that, your regard is kind of you're trying to cause trouble. Why are you doing that? Your opinions and your ideas were listened to, but there was a consensus that felt that this was the best way to go. And this, when you start arguing against the consensus, you're basically saying, I know better than everybody else, and you just have to listen to me. And that's very popular in the rest of the world. But in China, culturally, like I said, in a civilization, it is about how do you move forward, and that has to be on consensus. It cannot be dictated. And that's where the West is always trying to make this statement that that Xi Jinping is running the whole country.
He's a very clever man if he is. Yeah, I think what you've just done there is you've simplified something that so many people grapple with, including myself. What happens when people disagree? Well, I know I've met NPC members, delegates, and representatives. And I've had this discussion with them. Well, what about if you don't agree? Well, if we don't agree, it doesn't matter because the rest of the country does. And that's what we have to do. So this falling in line, once the decision has been made. Now, this is what we don't get in an adversarial system, a Westminster system, if you like, because you have people... in China, you have what Nuri Fitachi termed a loyal opposition. They're loyal to the people, loyal to the country. They're not loyal to their party. And that's the benefit of it, I think. And it certainly seems to match what you just said there. Once a decision has been made, the consensus takes that decision forward. Whether it be the right decision or the wrong decision, the consensus has got it and taken it forward. And then anybody who didn't agree with it falls in line and says, well, look, I've got to make the best of this. Very militaristic, if you like. We've got to just follow orders now.
Well, no, it's not orders so much as politeness. I mean, when you're in a group of Chinese people, and I'm sure you've experienced it, and there's some topic of discussion, whether it's where to eat or how to handle a situation, everyone has their, everyone who wants to has their say. And there's a lot of, going back and forth, and, the arguments can get quite heated and things like that. But at the end, somebody senior will say, look, it seems like this is the consensus. And, if there are, nods around the room, and it's not by vote. In the adversarial system, it's, might makes right. If I have 51%, who cares if you're right or wrong? I win. All right. In China, they'll discuss and discuss and discuss until they reach this consensus. That's why you don't go against it, because if you were part of that discussion and you were in the room and you agreed the consensus, you can't walk outside the room and start bad-mouthing it. That's not only impolite, it goes against everything in terms of civilization. Yeah. And this is something that's not new to China. This is something that goes back to, Confucian values and things like that. That there has to be an order and there has to be a system, and contentious issues have to be settled. But the best way is through consensus inside the room, not attacking everybody once you've stepped out of it.
Fair comment. So Dacian has put an interesting one here. I think the answer is a bit of both, but he's curious, he or she, I'm not sure, curious to know China's future growth. Is it more reform and opening, or more technological development, or all of the above?
all of the above. I mean, China is clearly trying to open itself up and get itself in a position where it could apply to the TPP or whatever, CPTPP,
CPTPP.
whatever it is. I don't, obviously Japan will probably try to nix that unless their economics are so bad they say, well, maybe it's time to put away the war hammers and start figuring out how to make plows. But it's a situation where they do feel that they need to get in step with the rest of the world on a number of issues. And it's not about kowtowing. It is simply recognizing that the world is just like a community. The world has many different views. It's not about being right. All right. It is about creating consensus within them. I mean, if you look at the multipolar world, there are two extreme alternatives, and of course, many things in between. One is that you create progress through consensus, right? The other one is that you try to maximize your country's personal advantage through conflict. Right? In many ways, it's what we call the prisoner's dilemma. Should I cooperate with somebody I don't like to make life better, or should I just, try whatever I can to get ahead, knowing full well that the other person will do the same, and we will probably both suffer. So China is saying, look, we have to be open to other people's thoughts. We don't have to accept them. They don't have to accept ours. In fact, we should understand each other's differences and accept them, not as something negative, but as something that we can learn from. And this is extremely important. This has happened in the past in Chinese culture. They had something called He culture, He culture. And there you had a situation where you had Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism all in the same city, all being practiced by different people, being talked about. And what was learned there is that you can have different ideas that are not antithetical. They don't have to attack each other. And coincidentally, from that, the birth of Buddhism, particularly in Japan and other parts of Asia, that's where it was born. It was a Chinese monk who went to Japan, and there's still tons of statues of him there that are kind of worshipped, indicating that this was a higher wisdom. So from the different ideas we can come up with better ideas. Ideas are not static. We can't look to the past to guide the future except from learning from it. All right. But the future is always going to be a little bit different. So we can apply the lessons, but the circumstances will, have to be taken in consideration.
Yeah, and this is an interesting point just coming out of the World Philosophy meeting in Chufu now, which is the birthplace of Confucius. And big meeting going on there right now, discussing pretty much the same things that you're just saying there. Yeah, so birthplace of Confucianism. Birthplace of Confucius, I think.
Okay. In terms of, I know that the whoever asked the question was really looking for a number, and I really couldn't give it to you, except I will point something out. And that is right now, everybody's attention is on the South China Seas. The problems that are there, NATO basically inching its way closer to asserting that they have control of the Indo-Pacific, as they have termed it, a made-up word. So, what are China's alternatives? And I would say to you that China's greatest weakness is that it is dependent on outside resources that are brought into China. Value is added to them, and those products are then sent out around the world. So it's a supply chain issue for China, both in terms of resources and markets. Now, what has changed recently is that Russia has become closer to China, mostly because of what's happened in Ukraine and what they feel is an encroaching, militaristic group that is, trying to get on its borders and is, trying to contain it. Now, look at Russia and Central Asia. You're talking a massive amount of land. Russia itself has 11 time zones, and it's number one in the world in resources. China, coincidentally, is number one in manufacturing. In fact, last year, China's production was greater than the next 9 countries combined. Washington's nightmare is actually that China and Russia are together. Why? Because there's a land border. It cannot be interfered with. And because of Russia's positions and also the stands, it opens Chinese goods to Europe, Middle East, North Africa, all the stands and places in between. And it makes it much harder to interfere. So it's probable that you'll start seeing more pipelines, rail and road, in addition to everything that's been done so far through the Belt and Road Initiative, linking these countries up, giving China an alternative to what they perceive, and I would agree with them, a containment policy that's militaristic. And how else can you explain 400 bases surrounding a country and trying to get more and put missiles on every single one of them?
It's not just that. I mean, they're expanding into the Philippines and they want to expand further into Japan, but they are moving troops away from Okinawa and down to North Mariana, I think it is, somewhere down in the South Pacific.
A lot of that has to do with local opposition. Every time a local girl gets raped, obviously people aren't very excited. If you talk to the people in Okinawa, they will tell you they want the base to close and move. They don't care about the economic consequences. They just don't like these foreigners. It's, remember, Japan was defeated twice. First, militarily, when we came in and, there was a war, we conquered them, and we have been occupying them militarily ever since. They were completely dependent on us for our nuclear umbrella. But the second time was economically. When Japan rose in the 70s, we became alarmed. Everything that we're saying in the US was saying about China today was said about Japan then. Doubt was cast on whether it was in fact a democracy, because the LDP had been in power for so long. Therefore, it was a dictatorial regime that was subsidizing excess capacity to basically destroy American jobs. Does that sound familiar? Anyways, that resulted
I'm old enough to remember it.
Well, I was there too. So that resulted in the Plaza Accords being signed. Japan was coerced into signing those. And since that time, China has gone sideways. In real dollar terms today, Japan is worth less than it was in 1986 when it signed the Plaza Accords. So you can't argue with statistics. And it's very clear that Washington's idea is that they want to do a repeat of what they did to Japan. And I don't think that China, it's not the same as Japan, and it certainly won't kowtow to that kind of nonsense.
There's an interesting question about media just come up here. Kyla Blecker, very critical of the West, but we have independent journalists like Gray Zone. Is there anything that comes close in China? I suspect not. So what will happen when China dominates the world? I like the when China dominates the world, but I think that's probably a lot less likely to happen than China just becoming part of a multipolar world cooperative, if you like, rather than a domination. What do you think about that? And what about Chinese media?
I mean, let me add a caveat here. I'm independent. And when I was asked to do Chinese television, my reaction was, look, I used to run political campaigns in the US, and I used to tell people what to say, and I'd threaten them if they didn't. So I was this coercive power. And I said, I really don't want anyone to tell me what to say or not say. And so I'm probably not a good fit for any kind of show in China. And I was told by somebody very senior in the government, says, no one will tell you what to say or not say. And, I said, I was kind of like, I don't know about that. But anyways, I started doing this independently, and I enjoyed the focus, not so much being on television as the questions. For me, every show is an opportunity to learn. Everyone has an opinion, but it's only when we compare opinions and their basis and their assumptions that we actually learn. So I continue to do it, and apart from 3 or 4 fresh interns who were saying, "Oh, please don't discuss this," at which point I would laugh. Yeah, it's there. Now, is there an independent media in China? Yes, there is, but you have to understand that the media in China is not the same as the media in the West, and this is a bone of contention. I've been a member of the Foreign Correspondents Club of China for, I don't know, 10 years or something like this. And there's a kind of feeling there that, look, the press is the fourth estate. We're the only ones who are holding these people accountable. So if we're not allowed to do our job, investigative journalism, no matter where it takes, finding whistleblowers, pointing to all the problems, all right, it's not a true government because we're being denied our right to do that. Well, when you have a one-party state, right, the media is very different. They are there to inform the people what the government is doing.
Yes.
Is there some investigative journalism? Yes. Is it as robust as in the West? No, absolutely not. Now, as China grows, one of the things that I've said often is that you cannot be in a situation where you're a leading power and you expect no one to criticize you. That's impossible. There's always going to be people who criticize you. But I said, China has one of the greatest stories ever told economically and socially, with poverty and reduction and bringing themselves, by their bootstraps, just being a major economic power and doing so while still trying to take care of its people as opposed to just a few. Use your story, stick to it, lead by example. Don't worry about detractors. I mean, what are they going to say? I don't like you. Well, fine. You don't like me. Do you have any reason? What system would be better? What are you doing to help? I mean, these are the questions that I commonly ask people in discussions, polite discussions. This is, well, tell me how you think it works better. And, they're like, well, that's terrible. They don't have any basis for that. But, people come in different flavors and shapes. Some people always see the downside. Some people always see the upside. Some people are more balanced, somewhere in between. You cannot change people, but you certainly can inspire people by leading by example. And I think that's China's greatest asset. So in terms of international press, they're not going to have the same influence that they have domestically. They're going to have to accept and grow a much thicker skin about that. And I've seen more maturity in that regard as the years have gone by. But it
is definitely changing. One of the things that I found with Chinese media, because I actually write for Chinese media as well sometimes, is the accuracy that's demanded, even in an op-ed. You're giving an opinion, but you can't give that opinion unless you have accuracy behind your opinion. You need to say why you formed this opinion, and it needs to be supported. And that's the one thing generally speaking, I cannot find Chinese media in a lie. I can't trap them. And I can do that every single day with Australia's ABC or CNN or Fox News.
Those
BBC.
are stereotypes. I mean, it's easy to talk in stereotypes. I always love it when people say, a lot of people say, or I've heard that. Or everybody knows. Really?
I've actually got a script for a video called Everybody Knows, and I haven't made it yet because it's quite long. Why do you say that? Well, everybody knows it. And that's how the script starts.
Everybody knew the world was flat. Yeah, well, okay.
Until it wasn't. Or apparently there are more Americans believe that than not.
Actually, the strangest thing is that in Brazil, there's a huge number who really do believe the world is flat. Now, look, you have to respect the fact that people have beliefs. I respect people more that they can back up their beliefs, as we've been discussing. But you're not going to change that. So, and you can't denigrate them, say, oh, you're just an ignorant, stupid person. Well, these are people, they come in good and bad flavors.
Different experience to us.
Yeah, it's what they've experienced and things like that. So I think it's better to, as I said, lead by example, inspire people. And, that a lot of that has to do with values. And that's one of the things that really is overlooked in all of these discussions, is that Xi Jinping is always talking about values. All right. In America, we talk about values, but there are values. Can't define them because we don't follow them too well. But
we
in
can't
China,
put them in
he's
writing.
really pushing it.
It's like the rules-based order. And this is actually a very valid point that Kyla has made here. What about lies by omission? And this is a factor of Chinese media. If they don't want you to know something, they will just not tell you. They don't lie about it ever. They just leave it out of the media if it's something that they think is, and this is where I think they're a little thin-skinned about things. You know, I have my own view on what should happen with Tiananmen Square, for example. I think they should pull a memorial up there and say we've learned from our mistakes, but they won't. Every year, June the 4th, it goes quiet.
But Jerry, I mean, okay, so you have to look at the context of things. I was very interested in Tiananmen Square, and I was trying to figure out why exactly, you'd send in the military to basically take down the flower of your own generation. I mean, these are these kids who were going to the universities. These weren't peasants from nowhere. These were the sons and daughters of prominent people within Beijing, within the party itself, the government, business, etc. And what it came down to, and you have to think about this. I'm not saying it was the decision was right or right. What I'm saying is that if you lived through the Cultural Revolution, all right, and what that did to people.
Yeah.
And some people say it was a wonderful learning environment. Other people, they died or were severely injured, bore scars from it. Years later, because what was the Cultural Revolution? It was the use of students to cause basically havoc. And when years later you see something like that happening again, right? The people who lived through it, right or left, they agreed on one thing: they never wanted it to happen again. So when the advice came, they said this has gone too far. These people are threatening the entire society. These are an aimless bunch of students who mean well but have no idea about governance and are demanding things they don't even understand or could be implemented. It became an impasse. And at that point, Li Peng said, look, we got to move in. Let's be strong. Let's take them down. We don't want another cultural revolution. And that's what happened. So yes, those deaths, tragic. All right. But, you always have to look at the context of what's happening in those times, rather than just saying, oh, well, it's just, a bunch of nice people who are out there trying to protest peacefully, and things just got out of hand because the government put an iron fist on it. That's something that we've learned from the West. There are always perspectives that have to be considered. I'm not telling people how they should think. I'm just saying, look carefully at the circumstances that were involved.
Yeah. There's a lot more to it. But again, talking about that topic of lying by omission, this is what China does every June.
No, absolutely. I often look, I'll see something in the international press, and I'll look online, on the Chinese media, and it's like crickets.
Not a word.
But
exactly.
on the other hand, Jerry, I will say this in defense. Eventually, it comes out. I mean, what a lot of people don't understand is the Chinese internet, Weibo, is not silent.
No.
They discuss everything and anything.
The interesting thing is, my wife's on Chinese social media, and I'm on Twitter and YouTube and English social media, if you like, English language social media. And she'll say to me, did you see this? Yeah, I've seen that. And I've said, did you see it? Yes, I've seen that. We're seeing the same things. It's not like it's a vacuum over here. People know. In fact, my wife just told me this.
Yes. I mean, even if the press doesn't report it, it isn't that people don't know. And this is something else that people have to realize. If you talk to the average person in the Midwest about, international stuff, very, very hazy. They really don't know where any other country is. They're not quite certain whether Canada is part of the U.S. or not. They know Mexico isn't. But in China, I've often been surprised. You go to second and third tier cities, and they'll be discussing China-U.S. relations. They know where Africa is. They know geographically where things are. They understand. They know the history of it. So they're much more engaged than people, because the stereotype in outside of China is that these people just have their heads down, and they pay no attention for fear of being locked up. Utter nonsense. These old men are always sitting around playing chess and cards, are always talking about current events, both domestic and international. So they're
got a lot of
much more engaged than
people
in the quote free world.
Yeah, true. They know a lot of what's going on. You've got a lot of experience in universities, so you'd be very cognizant of what's happening on campuses as well. You have a couple of chairs, don't you?
Yeah, well, I'm a selector for a program that's in one of the major universities, and involves selecting Chinese students for this program. It's a one-year free program, very prestigious, outside funded. So I just finished doing the yearly selection process, and to me, they say, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'm just so grateful that you allow me to do this, because it gives me a snapshot into how people are thinking, it's not people, how young people are thinking, because quite frankly, you and I, Jerry, will die, and then the next generations will come along, and I really do believe that you have to invest in the generations coming along if you want a better world, and this, and you can't invest in them until you understand them, and this is really, really important to me. I wish more people would think along those lines. A better world isn't what's good for you. A better world is what's good for everybody.
Yeah. Somebody's asked this question: what is your PhD discipline? Do you want to share that?
Sure. None. I only have a law degree.
I thought you had a PhD. You have a.
Yeah, people say I pilot higher and deeper, but I think that's not a not a designation. No, I finished. I have a Juris Doctorate in law, but so do many other people. So, higher education is very important. I've taught at PhD programs as a guest lecturer and things like this. It's education is extremely important, but in the end, it's what you use your education for. I was an English major, did law, was a lawyer, politician, investment banker, real estate developer. I did all these things. I even had a design and furnishings group. You did international designs, design cities, buildings, you name it. And I've done a variety of things. And I think the key is to learn how to learn.
Yes.
And that's, I think, more important than just saying, well, I have a degree. The degree is a distinction, but it can be a distinction without merit if you haven't learned what is important about learning, which is being open, and that it's a continuum process, not something that you achieve and finish.
Okay. Well, here's something that we'll wrap up the show with this one, because I think this is one of the nicer comments we've seen today. We're both
generally they're bad when I'm on.
No. There've been a lot of good comments, but I like this one because we are China Gold, and Warwick is a regular guest on my show. We last time we spoke was I think was about a month ago, and we did 3 in quick succession, and we had a good reason for that. It was BRI related, but we did 3 in quick succession, and then we said, well, we're going to do this again regularly. But what I would like now is, because I know that you and Warwick are great friends as well, you're both part of the Taihe Institute, let's get the 3 of us together sometime in the not too distant future to discuss, maybe we can discuss what did happen at the third plenary session instead of
that would be fabulous.
Yeah. And I know
the reason I'm friends with Warwick is because he's so brilliant
Yes,
and articulate. So anytime I have a chance to be with him, I consider it an honor and a learning experience.
Well,
and of
funnily
course,
enough,
you, Jerry.
I've actually met you in person, but I haven't met Warwick in person. I mean, this is kind of amazing to me. I mean, we're both Australians, but both.
Well, the next time whenever he comes to Beijing, I host him for a couple of dinners. So I will let you know, and hopefully you can attend.
I would like that very much, but Beijing's a long way away. It will take me about 20 days to ride there.
Well, I was thinking more of fast train.
Yeah. I make this joke. I went to work for in Harbin for 2 weeks. I was doing a training contract. I was training some teachers, and I came home from Harbin by bike. So I call it my ride home from work. They said, "What day do you want to fly home?" I said, "Well, can you just give me the money?" "Yeah, sure. We can, you're going to stay here." "No, I'm going to buy a bike." So I bought a bike and rode it home. It took 42 days to get home from work.
You see, Jerry, this is the wonderful thing about life, is that we have people like yourself. I mean, people who embrace life, see the positives, also see the negatives, but see that there is, in fact, hope out there, and that we can, in fact, work together as opposed to, killing each other. I don't think killing really works. I mean, we've been doing it a long time. We don't seem to have a better world. Maybe it's time to give the other stuff a chance.
Yeah, it might be a good idea. And Warwick has put together this group that he nicknamed Project Amplify, which I think is a brilliant thing, which has brought us together, or brought us closer together. And I think this is the multipolarity in a peaceful world. And I think that's a fantastic thing. So we're all working together on that. So a lot of comments coming in saying, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on my show. It has been a great pleasure. And I think it's now we're coming up to 90 minutes, which is where I usually try and end the shows. And I think unless you've got something that you really want to add.
I feel bad. I've been gassing on that long.
No, 90 minutes is normal. I had Warwick on one day, and we talked for 3 hours, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning.
He can do that. I'm not knowledgeable or enough to be able to talk. He does have a PhD.
Yeah, he's a very smart guy. That's for sure.
Terrific guy. And they're smart, and then there's also somebody who has principles and values. Although you do have to ask him who put Kevin Rudd in office.
At the time he came to office, I thought Kevin Rudd was okay.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we do a lot of things when we were young, and then we reflect on them in the past and say, I don't know if that was the best idea.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, true. Jerry, it really is a supreme pleasure. Thank you. You ask such warm and interesting questions. I mean, it's too often people just want to know the numbers and things like that, and you really want to understand and bring forth, what are the issues behind it, and I think that's so important.
Well, please don't tell anyone. I ask these questions because I don't know the answer.
Well, that's why I ask questions too.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, and everybody who's out there. We got up to over 250 viewers. This is a good live stream for us. That's a very good one.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and all of the good questions that came in. And I think on that happy note, we will call it a